Welcome to the Deep Dive. We've got some fascinating stuff to unpack today. You sent us a collection of material all about war, so that's exactly what we're going to do. We're diving deep, pulling out those key insights so you end up with, well, a real grasp on things without feeling completely swamped.
Yeah, spot on. The sources you sent, it's pretty remarkable, actually. We're talking centuries of thought here, cutting across all kinds of fields.
Totally. I mean, we've got politicians weighing in. Think Teddy Roosevelt, Mikhail Gorbachev. Then there's the scientists like Albert Einstein, Robert Oppenheimer, and of course, philosophers, writers, Tolstoy, Orwell.
Yeah.
Even contemporary figures like Putin and Malala. It's quite the mix.
And the thing is, it's not just opinions. You've included some serious academic analyses, too. Stuff about, like, the root causes of war, how it gets presented to the public, provides a really well comprehensive view, I'd say.
Right. So your mission, if you choose to accept it, and I think you kind of already have, is to walk away from this deep dive with a much richer, more nuanced understanding of war. How's it been viewed throughout history? Where does it even come from? And what about all the stories, the narratives that surround it?
Great place to start.
Yeah.
I mean, with those politicians you mentioned, it's really interesting to see how, well, their jobs, the historical moments they were living in, it all shaped their views, didn't it?
Sure. Like, take Teddy Roosevelt. Speak softly and carry a big stick. It sounds, on the surface, like a pretty balanced approach. Diplomacy, right? But also, making sure everyone knows you've got power. But historically speaking, did it always play out so defensively? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, that's sharp. It's like even a seemingly balanced approach, something like what Roosevelt's talking about. Well, it could be used to justify, getting a little aggressive, maybe expanding a bit more than you should. It shows you how tricky it is wielding power on that global stage. And then there's Churchill. He's dealing with World War II. Talk about an existential threat to freedom, right? So for him, war, grim necessity. That quote, those who choose temporary security over freedom deserve to lose both. I mean, that really underlines it, right? The stark choice he felt he had. No way around it.
It's striking how a sense of threat can totally shift your whole perspective on war. And then you've got JFK, Cold War, nuclear annihilation looming, calling for peace, dialogue, but at the same time, got to be nuclear ready. It's a tightrope walk, isn't it? Trying to prevent total disaster, but also deterring anyone who might be thinking of starting something. Peace is important not only for our generation, but for all future generations. Talk about thinking long term.
And what's really fascinating is how, as we go through these figures, their thinking seems to, well, evolve. By the time you get to Gorbachev, it's all about diplomacy. Peace is the only alternative to destruction. You can really sense the lessons of the Cold War there. The sheer destructive potential of these modern weapons, it's on his mind for sure.
Almost like a hopeful shift in how politicians were thinking, maybe driven by how risky conflict had become. Now let's switch gears a bit. Scientists, they come at this from a whole different angle, wouldn't you say?
For sure. Einstein, the guy who figured out the fundamental laws of the universe, yet a devoted pacifist. That belief of his, peace cannot be achieved through force, only through understanding, speaks volumes, right? He was convinced that real, lasting peace, it has to come from intellectual connection, empathy, that kind of thing.
Almost like a scientific approach to peace itself. You got to understand what drives conflict to actually counter it. And then there's Oppenheimer, the atomic bomb, right? That quote, "Now we have become deadly gods." So much weight there. The responsibility, the knowledge of what science had unleashed.
No kidding. Creating something that destructive. It's like a whole new level of ethical burden for scientists. But then you have someone like Steven Pinker, a bit more optimistic, the better angels of our nature. His argument is that despite what the news might say, humanity, we've actually become way less violent over time. He puts it down to social progress, political stuff, all kinds of things.
So we see the horror of war, but Pinker is suggesting this long-term trend in the opposite direction. That's interesting. Now, philosophers and writers, they often dig into the human side of conflict, the societal stuff.
Exactly. Bertrand Russell, anti-war activist his whole life. War solves nothing except who will die. Straight to the point, right? No romanticizing war there, just the hard truth of its futility.
It does strip things down, doesn't it? No illusions. And then Tolstoy, nonviolent resistance. The kingdom of God is within you. He rejected war completely. Saw it as going against our core values, spiritual stuff too. Pushed for peaceful alternatives instead.
He saw it as this fundamental violation of, well, everything he believed in, ethically, spiritually. And then you've got Orwell, dystopian worlds, right? He was really sharp about how war gets used, a tool for political control. War is peace. Chilling, isn't it? How those totalitarian regimes, they can twist language, twist reality itself to hold on to power, and war, it becomes part of that.
Disturbing to think about how power can warp something so destructive. Okay, let's bring in some other influential voices, see what they have to say.
Sure thing. Martin Luther King Jr., he was deeply rooted in that philosophy of nonviolent resistance from his work in the civil rights movement, and he became a huge voice against war, especially Vietnam. We must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools. It's like he gets in the core of it, right? We're all connected. Conflict, it's self-destruction.
Echoes what Einstein was saying about understanding, doesn't it? The need for connection, not division, and Gandhi. His whole life, his philosophy, all about nonviolent resistance. Eyes expect weapons to make peace, but peace can only be achieved through peaceful means. There's no wavering there. The means shape the ends, that's what he's saying.
Yeah, his life really showed the power of that, didn't it? Nonviolent change, both socially and politically. And then someone like Malala, she knows the violence of war firsthand, but she champions education as the real weapon. One teacher, one book, one pen, and one pencil can do more than a weapon. So powerful, right? Knowledge, learning. That's what truly transforms things.
It's such a contemporary voice, so personal. It really highlights the long game, doesn't it? Education, building peaceful societies. Now, let's look at some of today's political figures. How do they approach war?
Well, if you look at Putin, it's clear he sees war as a way to, exert influence. He often frames military action as protecting Russia's interests. And he really leans on those historical cultural ties to justify things. It's a very carefully crafted narrative.
One that resonates with a lot of people, both inside Russia and out. Then you have someone like Walter Isaacson. He tends to analyze war through the lens of technology, how it advances, and he looks at the choices made by leaders, scientists. It's about human agency, really.
Isaacson's work really shows how those in power, their decisions, they shape the course of conflicts, sometimes in huge ways. So looking at all these historical perspectives, are there any big themes, maybe some points where they diverge?
It seems like across the board, there's this idea of war as a failure, maybe a last resort, sometimes. But ideally, something we should move beyond. Understanding, education, nonviolent methods. There's a real desire for alternatives.
Definitely. Now, in your materials, you also brought up this interesting question, East versus West perspectives on war. Based on these figures, is there a difference?
Right. Do we see any distinct patterns, contrasting viewpoints based on their cultural background, where they come from?
It's subtle, but yeah, some tendencies do emerge. On the Western side, the figures we've talked about, Einstein, Russell, King, they often emphasize individualism, the power of reason, enlightenment through knowledge, nonviolence as this moral imperative coming from individual conscience. The focus is on understanding on an individual level as the path to peace.
Makes sense, given how the West has historically emphasized things like individual rights and rationalism. What about the Eastern perspective?
With figures like Gandhi, Malala, there's more emphasis on holism, the interconnectedness of people and society, and even with the natural world. And there's this deep commitment to empathy and nonviolence, but as essential for harmony within society. It's about the well-being of the whole, tied in with peace.
So maybe less focus on individual rationalism, more on collective harmony, maybe even spiritual ideas.
I think you've hit on something there. Both East and West, they champion nonviolent conflict resolution. And education, it's crucial for both. But yeah, the philosophical foundation, it can be different. The West leans towards individual understanding, ethics, and the East brings in societal, communal aspects, sometimes spiritual ones too, but they both aim for peace.
What's remarkable is how, even starting from different places, they end up with a similar goal, a world where peace comes from understanding, education, rejecting violence. Now let's dive into something else your sources highlight, the genesis of war. Why does it actually break out?
Yeah, let's get into the nitty-gritty. The material you provided, it lists a whole range of factors. It's pretty comprehensive. We can start with the economic.
Economics, right. Always seems to be a factor.
It's huge. Competition over resources, land, water, stuff like oil, diamonds. Historically, that's been a major driver of conflict, and it still is. Colonial wars, all about grabbing resources. Even the Iraq War in 2003, some argue there were economic motives there. And look at places like Congo. The violence there, it's fueled by who controls the mineral wealth. What's interesting is how the type of economic competition is changing. It used to be land, raw materials. Now it might be tech, financial systems. What nations value, what they'll fight for. It's evolving.
It's not just the physical stuff anymore. Knowledge, financial power. That's become a battleground too. And then there's this idea that economic crises themselves can trigger war.
Definitely. Think about it. If a country's economy crashes, poverty's widespread, inequality is soaring. It creates this breeding ground for instability and resentment.
Yeah.
And then you get political actors who exploit that. They scapegoat someone, some outside enemy, or they try to solve internal problems by starting an external conflict. The Great Depression in the 1930s and then the rise of the Nazis in Germany, that's a prime example of how these things can connect.
Desperation, hardship. It can make people vulnerable to aggression, to extreme ideologies. What about political and strategic factors? They always seem to be at the heart of things when war breaks out.
Totally fundamental, the basic struggle for power. You want more territory, more influence on the world stage. Maybe you just want to redraw the map. It's been a constant throughout history. The European powers, how they carved up the world in the 19th century, Russia taking Crimea more recently. It's all about power, getting that strategic edge.
Projecting power, yeah. Securing a better position for yourself globally. And then there's nationalism. So potent, isn't it?
Hugely. Extreme nationalism, that intense identification with your nation, that loyalty, and then the desire for certain groups to have their own nation. It's fueled countless wars. The Balkan Wars in the early 1900s, Yugoslavia breaking up in the 90s. Tragic examples of how national identity can lead to brutal conflict.
And sometimes it's not even about these grand ideals. Sometimes it's just about the people in power looking out for themselves.
Sadly, that's true too. You get authoritarian leaders, elites. They might actually start or escalate a conflict just to hold on to power, or to distract people from problems at home, or even to enrich themselves through war. The classic example, right? The dictator who invents an enemy to make himself look good.
It's cynical, but it happens. Your source also talks about ideological and cultural differences.
Yeah.
That feels like it goes really deep to the core of who we are.
Absolutely. Conflicts rooted in religion. The Crusades, what happened in Northern Ireland more recently, they're often really hard to resolve. You're dealing with deeply held beliefs, worldviews. It's the same with political ideologies clashing. Communism versus capitalism, the Cold War, fascism in World War II. These are some of the biggest, most defining conflicts in history.
And then there's just plain prejudice, dehumanizing the other. That's led to some truly awful things.
It's horrifying, but it's true. Ethnic, racial prejudice, Rwanda, the Holocaust. Dehumanizing an entire group of people makes violence seem acceptable, even necessary.
A terrifying reminder of what unchecked prejudice can lead to. The source also mentions how problems within a society, internal contradictions, can contribute to war.
Yeah, tensions within a society, inequalities, those can spill over into external conflict. Class struggles, deep-seated grievances, they were factors in the civil wars in Vietnam, Spain. And then times of instability, like revolutions, they create openings for outside forces to get involved. Think of the American Revolution or the Arab Spring more recently.
So sometimes the seeds of war are sown at home, not on some international stage. What about the role of technology, the military itself? New weapons, new capabilities, that seems like a constant factor.
Absolutely. When you have new military tech being developed all the time and countries are constantly building up their arsenals, it creates this atmosphere of suspicion and fear, makes conflict more likely. The arms race before World War I, that's a classic example. Even the space race during the Cold War, it had this military undercurrent. And then there's what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. Powerful interests, economic interests that benefit from military spending, they can actually push for conflict.
Makes you think, right? How these cycles of military buildup can become self-perpetuating. The source also brings up things like ecological challenges, demographics. Not the usual suspects, you might think.
But they're becoming more and more important. When resources are scarce because of environmental damage, climate change, water shortages, it just intensifies tensions, can even lead to conflict directly. We're seeing this play out in parts of Africa, the Sahel region. And then there are population pressures, too many people in one place, mass migrations, ethnic imbalances. All these can contribute to instability, then conflict, like what happened in Sudan, the Darfur region.
So environmental issues, population issues, they're right there on the front lines now. And then the source gets into the psychology of it all, the human element.
That's a tricky one, always generates debate. Some anthropologists, they say aggression is just part of human nature. It's instinctual. Tribal warfare, they argue, it was the early form of this. And it's still expressed today in large-scale conflicts. Now, not everyone agrees with that, but it does add to this pessimistic view that maybe we just can't escape war.
Like it's wired into us somehow.
Hey.
And then there are the limited resources we've got. This planet's not getting any bigger.
Right. More people, fewer resources, water, land, energy. The competition's going to get fiercer, right? And that leads to more tension, more conflicts, potentially more desperate ones. And climate change, it just throws fuel on the fire. More scarcity, more migration, more instability.
Makes a bad situation worse. And then technology keeps advancing, more destructive power, more sophisticated weapons. It's not exactly a recipe for peace.
Nope. Now, nuclear weapons, they've probably prevented some huge wars, the whole idea of mutually assured destruction. But they also represent this massive risk. What if someone uses them by accident or on purpose? And the new stuff that's emerging, AI, autonomous weapons, that could change everything, make war even more unpredictable, more destructive. It's a scary thought.
So looking back at history, maybe our biology, resource scarcity, and ever-advancing technology, it's a pretty bleak picture.
Yeah.
But your sources, they do offer a more optimistic view, too, right?
Yeah, they do. People like Steven Pinker, they point out that violence has actually been declining globally. And they've got data to back it up. Stronger international laws, more robust institutions, globalization making countries more interdependent, more democracies. All these things contribute to a less violent world. There's even a theory called democratic peace theory. It basically says that stable democracies don't really fight each other.
So it's like, as we make progress politically, economically, socially, it actually reduces the likelihood of war. And what about international organizations? What role do they play in this more hopeful scenario?
Organizations like the UN, the EU, NATO, they're seen as crucial for preventing big conflicts. Diplomacy, sanctions, peacekeeping missions. And they provide a framework for international law, for cooperation.
They're like the referees, right?
Yeah.
Keeping things in check, providing a way to resolve disputes peacefully. And it seems like our culture is changing, too. Our attitudes towards violence are shifting.
Yeah, for sure. Our ethical standards are higher now. Human rights are more important globally. There's a growing sense that war is just wrong. It's primitive. It's not how you solve problems. All this contributes to a culture that's moving away from violence.
A moral evolution, you could say.
Yeah.
And even technology, which we talked about as a threat, it can also be a force for good here.
Definitely. The internet, social media, they can show us the true horrors of war. They can help us understand different cultures, connect people across borders.
Building bridges, fostering empathy. So we've got these two contrasting views, one pretty pessimistic, the other more hopeful. What'll determine which path we end up taking?
I think it comes down to a few key things. Climate change, it's a wild card. It could cause more conflicts over resources, or it could force us to cooperate more to tackle this shared threat. Nuclear weapons, they're a double-edged sword. Deterrent, yeah, but also this huge risk. And new tech, AI, cyber weapons, that's going to change the game completely. And then there's the global economy. Countries are so interconnected now, war could be too costly. But then you see rising nationalism, protectionism that could undo all that.
So many factors pushing and pulling in different directions. Your source also brings up this philosophical idea about free will.
Right. The point is, we're not doomed to war. We have choices. We can choose to cooperate, to put global challenges first, to stick with diplomacy instead of force. Peace movements, visionary leaders, individual choices, all these things matter.
So it's not like our destiny is set. It's what we choose to do, both individually and collectively, that shapes the future. So where does this leave us? Perpetual war or lasting peace?
Your source argues that humanity's future is not fixed. If we want to avoid destroying ourselves, we have to choose understanding over destruction. It's like Einstein said, peace comes from understanding. So we need to invest in ways to resolve conflicts, address global challenges together, and build a culture that truly values peace above everything else.
Powerful stuff. So in this deep dive, we've covered a lot of ground. Historical perspectives, the root causes of war, how it's often presented in a misleading way.
We've seen different views. Some see war as a necessary evil. Others believe in nonviolence no matter what. And we've looked at the complex web of factors that cause war. Economics, politics, ideology, social issues, psychology, even the environment.
And that big question, are we doomed to keep fighting? The takeaway here is that understanding all of this, all these different facets of war, it's the first step to maybe breaking the cycle. It's a reminder that the choices we make, they really matter. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
The windows tremble from thunder. The fiery trails tear the sky. Soldiers in dusty uniforms write letters, words that we'll never send. Peace is not taken with sword and sword, nor is it bought with blood on the fronts. It is born in hearts that are heard, like the star that shines through the darkness. Wind sings songs for the survivors, children's laughter in the dust of ruins. One world, two paths, fire or a hand, which did not hold a bullet, but gave a sign. Peace is not taken with sword and sword, nor is it bought with blood on the fronts. It is born in hearts that are heard, like the star that shines through the darkness. Let's talk, let's listen to the pain. Let's understand that everyone loses. It's not a victory when they die, and when to meet with hello. And if someone asks why I sing, I will say peace is the way, not the goal. It is in the eyes that do not hate, in the hands that stop before cannot. Einstein said, not strength but understanding. And I sing this truth in silence, while hearts know pain and hope. Peace will be a bridge, not a chasm, not a border.